Number 2 is a pretty good question also. And 3 short IDs. Any questions? You want to type something in? Anything? Any issues at all? Seems as though I might have made a mistake on something for the assignment today. Oh, I just put an arbitrary time for, I don't know why I put 8:55. If you're talking about the assignment for the short answer questions, I got a question about that. I just put due today at 8:55 p.m. I just want it done by this evening. I was going to put it a.m. I don't know. The big thing is I just want it done today. Any other questions? Anything about that before we get started? We're good? Let me make sure I have volume on, so in case you need to ask me a question. Last thing. Okay. So I'm recording this. Good. So I'm going to cover a lot today. The assignment for the notes will drop, but this will be part of the quiz. And the quiz will be purely on notes. It's going to be next Monday. So I'm looking at 15 or so multiple choice, kind of matching things, and 2 to 3 short IDs. You'll have 25 minutes to do it. I don't think that should be any problem for you. Most of you have done a lot faster than that. You're starting to write significantly faster. It's noticeable. It's just practice and getting used to what to write. No, there will not be a short answer question, just because I want to make sure I ask a question about Reconstruction and the New South. I'll put in there something about the West, maybe, but probably short IDs would be on Reconstruction, New South, sharecropping, Jim Crow laws, the lost cause. And when I mean Reconstruction, I mean Congressional Reconstruction. Oh yeah, and the Compromise of 1877. All good choices for that. For the West, the big one are the Dawes Act, the total war against American Indians, and homesteading, and railroads. Can't emphasize railroads enough. There might be a couple questions on railroads. And then for the new Industrial Revolution, it would be the Second Industrial Revolution, so what made it up. I might throw in the Trike C thing, and I've decided. Other good questions would, of course, be railroad, all the different ways of government aid for business and laissez-faire economics. Maybe a question on innovation. Scientific method, efficiency. And then, of course, the corporation, and today we'll get to social Darwinism and labor unions. All right, so let's go ahead then and get started. If you look at this here, we've already talked about, so I talked about how corporations, the whole thing was to limit the risk and spread the risk out, and do not forget limited liability. I can't emphasize that enough. If I ask a question about corporations, you have to mention limited liability. Okay, you're only liable. Investors are only liable for what they initially invest. So if the corporation has any debts or even crimes, so if a corporation commits a crime, the entity is responsible. If the corporation has debt, the entity is responsible. And we see that with the banks, we see that with pollution. Go to Libby and find out what happens when the corporation is only responsible. To a lesser degree, Butte. In fact, Butte's a pretty amazing one. The company basically got off scot-free, and the cleanup there, the never-ending cleanup, as it turned out it's going to be by the taxpayers. And then everybody wants to limit risk. They're in competition, and that's where we get pools, trusts. I talk about vertical and horizontal integration. And here's Rockefeller and Vanderbilt are good examples of horizontal. Gustavus Swift and Meatpacking, Andrew Carnegie and U.S. Steel are vertical integration. And so those are big ones there. Sorry, I'm trying to get my mouse to work. I got my little pointer. And then just not to forget, J.P. Morgan and its finance, and that whole thing is he was giving money to he was making risky investments in different companies. He wanted to make sure he got his money back. So it's called interlocking directorates, where he put his people on the board of directors of different companies to make sure that he got his money back, so they could control cutthroat competition and limit the risk. And so this whole point is, in capitalism, one of the things about capitalism, they all kind of want to get rid of capitalism. They want those who run the companies and therefore influence politics and therefore decisions that affect our lives to this day are done by people who really want to get rid of the market. They don't want risk. And that's where we get the holding company. And I believe in all three classes I got to about here. So holding company, just to repeat, 1888, New Jersey, jealous of New York, wanting to attract companies there. They changed their law to allow a corporation to own other corporations, and those are holding companies. And this will allow companies to get very, 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 very big. Thus, you see that sign, Standard Oil in New Jersey. There's no oil in New Jersey. There's no reason to have oil companies in New Jersey except for this change in the law. They created Standard Oil of New Jersey as a holding company so they could incorporate and buy the other corporations from New Jersey. You see similar things today. A lot of the banks and credit card companies are in Delaware or Virginia, and they dominate politics there because they change their laws. And also Nebraska. Nebraska is another big place for that. So that's an example of that. Other states immediately saw all these companies going to New Jersey and saw, wow, they're giving a lot of money to politicians. And so they changed their laws too. And so very, very, very quickly, holding companies came to dominate politics. And you're going to get, they literally called it merger mania, where these companies started buying up and scooping other countries, and a shockingly fast concentration of wealth. One thing about capitalism, do not forget this, because the machines are so expensive. Economies of scale gives a huge advantage to the big, and there's always this pressure to get big and have a monopoly. In fact, it's always difficult, because you can have a government that sets up the rules, because they set up the rules, because they make the money, to have competition, or a government that sets up the rules to allow monopolies. And if you have monopolies, no competition. And so what we have created are called oligopolies. So I believe I only got to this in one class, so I'm sorry it's a little bit of a repeat. But oligopoly, that's when a few companies operate like a monopoly. There's a term I've mentioned before, and you've probably seen before, called an oligarchy, which is a government by a few. Oligopoly, a few companies, they dominate the market. They basically set the price, even though technically it's not a pool. It functions like this. They also set the wages. They set the price they'll pay to suppliers of goods. They dominate the market. It operates like a monopoly. So you'll see that in like auto companies. You see that in banks now, in the media. I mean, basically, you try to watch something and everything's essentially the same. It seems to be either apocalyptic movies or superheroes, or on television, I guess I don't watch enough television. Imagine I watch television, and I'd come up with an example. Okay, I watch stuff, but mostly like I feel like I'm watching old television. Okay, so few companies act like monopolies, so that would come to dominate, and this is basically our economy today. Today, we have some monopolies, but we have oligopolies. But you go to small towns, monopolies run small towns. And then one more big happened at the same time. The Southern Pacific case basically said, and this was just in addition to the summary of the law, it's one of the most remarkable rulings in Supreme Court history, because it doesn't say it in the actual ruling, but it was added to the summary, that corporations have rights under the 14th Amendment. So everyone got that. I didn't type that in. Maybe I should have, because it's such a big deal. So I'm going to, because I care about you as people. Corporations have 14th Amendment rights. Those are the rights, not all of it, it's complex. But 14th Amendment that's the constitutional amendment that said people have certain civil rights. People in this context meant men. But citizens have these rights under the 14th Amendment, like the Bill of Rights applies to the states. And what it says here is corporations essentially have those rights. Now, this is going to be ruled and looked at in various different ways, but today, the current Supreme Court has basically ruled that corporations have all the rights of people. Yet this is something, I don't know if you know this. Corporations are not people. They don't die. They don't have emotions. Corporations have one goal: to make money for their stockholders. That's their only purpose. It's not even to produce goods. It's to make money. It's not to hire workers. It's to make money. And sometimes people put personal ambitions to corporations. In fact, we all do that a little bit. If you like a football, basketball, or baseball team, you put personal ambitions to a corporation. They just want to make money. But when you get this, then what we have here is U.S. corporate mergers in the years after New Jersey changed their law, and by 1995, all the other states followed. Look at the expansion of mergers, just huge mergers, till we became a country of almost pure oligopolies. And what this led to is unprecedented concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few. Because corporations, when they become bigger, they control the market, drive competitors out. So there's fewer and fewer people reaping the profits. Remember, in capitalism, whoever has the capital has the profit. And a small percentage of people actually own stocks. And then they begin to use their political muscle to control politics. And we see it similar to today. We have this same issue today, where the big companies use their political muscle to control politics. Need to drink. Sound effects. Are we good? All right. And that is we start getting the corporations called the beast. And that's more and more, they were either oligopolies or monopolies. But remember, oligopolies function as monopolies. They control the market. They literally control people's lives. And that's why you see over and over again monopolies being drawn as these horrible, monstrous figures. Here's another one of Standard Oil. And you notice its tentacles are, these are supposed to be state houses. And they're controlling state governments, controlling oil, all these things, shipping that are necessary for life. I mean, railroads would personify this, and Standard Oil had their tentacles in railroads. Railroads, if you have one railroad going into that town, it controls the town. We see that in element today with broadband internet. We're able to do this because of broadband internet, and one company controls it in this area. So they have a monopoly. And with monopolies and oligopolies are the same thing. Things we talked about before. Prices can go up. Now, it's got to be for products that people want. If you have a monopoly on the sale of wooden shoes, the odds are you can't really raise the price, because this might shock you. A lot of people don't like wooden shoes. I know it's a Helena thing, but outside, people don't want that. But that's not the only way they can get more profit. Why create better ones? Why have better service? Why have better products? I could have put down quality goes down too. I probably should have put down quality. I'm going to put down quality because that's kind of a big deal. Quality goes down. Why produce a better product? Why innovate? Why provide better service? Because you're the only one. If you're a monopoly or an oligopoly, there's absolutely no reason to do it. And then there's something else. Things that operate like a monopoly or an oligopoly have what's called a monospony. I know you're thinking he just wanted to say monospony. Okay, partially. But the other thing about monospony is it is a single buyer. In fact, let me write that in, because that's kind of a big deal. I don't know why I like arrows so much. It's a single buyer. They're the only ones. This is something that, if we're in class, it's just easier to do, but we're online. I want to make sure you see it. They're a single buyer. They're the only one hiring workers. That means buying as in buying in the labor market. So wages go down. If there's a single buyer, they can go to suppliers and gouge suppliers. Walmart would be infamous of going to companies providing shirts, for example, textiles, clothing, and say, we're only going to pay 60% of what you want. But because we have over 50% of the market in the United States, you got to meet us or you go out of business. And by the way, what do suppliers do? It's no coincidence that the rise of Walmart was at the same time that almost all the clothing companies started building their textile mills in places like Guatemala or Vietnam. We saw it in China, but they're starting to move out of China, in Bangladesh, to pay lower wages to meet Walmart. It's hard to find someplace that had more power than Walmart in the 1990s. Literally overnight, it's almost impossible to buy clothing made in the United States. Why? Monopoly. Monopolies have such control. If you look at it and say, God, there's just, my wages are stagnant and it feels like I'm losing control of my life. It's very difficult. I have no power. The biggest reason is monopolies. Okay, you might not feel that because, but I know adults do. So with that, and then political control. Political control. And what they do is, and I put dollar signs in there, but they give money to politicians. They control money. They control the political process. Because once monopolies have it, they don't want to give up the power. So they keep funneling money in. And you'll see this in both political parties. Probably the biggest, most dramatic divide between those who want to control monopolies and those who are getting money from the monopolies and don't want to change it. You'll see this divide in the 1890s all the way through today in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, much of the leadership, and we'll see about the current president, but the last 3 Democratic presidents were pretty pro-monopoly, really pro-monopoly. All Republicans are always pro-monopoly, but almost always. But then there's a big group of the Democratic Party that's opposed. And you'll see this in the 1890s. We'll see this with the populist movement. We'll see this with Franklin Roosevelt. The Democratic Party really is just all over the place. And you can really see it here, this pipe. And what we have, therefore, is a new kind of businessman that would be dubbed the robber barons. And this is a picture of the old robber barons, which were knights that would charge huge tolls on places like the Rhine River for barge traffic. They have the power, they have a castle, you must give us money. And now the new ones, this is another one from Puck magazine. It's, here are the monopolies. You notice they have trusts on their chest, very clever. And here are workers and politicians and everybody giving them money because they control everything. It's a lot of people get like, a lot of businessmen today say, I'm not a robber baron because I gave money to my foundation. Okay, that's me being a little facetious, but no, it just basically means that they will do anything it takes to gain money, to get control of the market, to create a monopoly. And so these new entrepreneurs, and the way they looked at it is, I can do anything I want because I take all the risk, and therefore I should get all the profit. Why shouldn't I come into the market and do whatever I want? Now, of course, you might argue you're driving out small businesses. Workers are being horribly mistreated in jobs that are becoming more and more dangerous. And then when they're too old to work, they're literally thrown out as used up material and starved to death. I mean, what would happen to this to workers who are too old to work anymore was shocking. The vast majority were simply left to die, and I'm not making that up. And you might be thinking, wait a second, it's always been like that. No, it's never been like that until the Industrial Revolution. The concept of retirement never made sense to anybody until you have a job in a factory, or the Industrial Revolution and the development of capitalism. If anybody says, well, they don't talk about retirement in, I see people say it's not in the Bible if they're Christian. It's like, because they didn't have this economy. But anyways, And so what they wanted is, number one, they wanted to do whatever it takes to increase their wealth. Wealth, 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 wealth. And then what comes with the wealth and becomes even more addictive is the power. You'll notice something. There are people today that have more money than they ever know what to do with. They have so much money. But it's not the money. It's the power and influence that gives you. And right here is Cornelius Vanderbilt. And it's showing him marshaling railroads. And this is Jay Gould. Well, basically what it is, these represent two other smaller railroads. And this is him using like a puppet master controlling his trust. And you'll also notice this, if you're a new entrepreneur and a robber baron, you can have really cool facial hair. I know Burnside was great, but Vanderbilt, wow. Yes, and Vanderbilt did feel guilty and wanted the power and the fame. So yes, the college would be named after him. He got his start in shipping, making the run to Nicaragua, but would become big in the New York Central Railroad. And there you can see it right in the middle, the New York Central Railroad. And here he is, the Hudson River Railroad. There'll be other railroads that would enter his trust. He'd be in competition with Jay Gould right here, and the Erie Railroad, but eventually they would come to dominate. And he was called the Commodore because he had shipping. And basically his point of view was, it's my money, I can do anything we wanted. Well, yeah, arguably with your money, you can do anything you want. But when you become that big, things you do with your money will have a direct impact on other people's lives. And this is where we get to rules in government. Can you do whatever you want? Damn the consequences. Do the ends justify the means? And what are the ends for people like Vanderbilt? Wealth, power, facial hair. And so look at the result of this. When we talk about these new robber barons, I put this up here to show the concentration of wealth. I want to give you a diagram. This is of 3 years ago, some of these companies have combined. You see these companies in the middle? They control virtually everything you go to a grocery store and buy. So if you go to Safeway, for example, and start buying stuff, why did I say Safeway? Why not? And you'll notice Nestle, for example, has all these brands from, yes, Kit Kats to Gerber to Nestle to Purina cat food, Procter & Gamble, from Tide all the way to Crest. Unilever is kind of shocking, from Slim Fast and Skippy all the way down to Q-tips. Kellogg's, massive holding company. These are all holding companies that are all the legacy of these robber barons, get bigger and bigger and bigger. Mondelez International is just absolutely massive because they are a holding company for Kraft, which is a holding company for Cadbury, which is a holding company for all of these different companies. Coca-Cola can go on and on and on. Yeah, PepsiCo owns Yum, which owns Taco Bell. And there are more than this. Let me give you another example of this. These are the companies that control the vast majority of media. This is a little bit old because 20th Century Fox has sold a huge amount to Disney. They sold that right there. And so did Time Warner, and they sold theirs to Disney. And so Disney has even bigger, more than this. And that is the market share of the media. This are the banks. There are 4 banks in the United States that control about 98% of all banking, or 90% of all banking in the United States. These are all oligopolies. So what that is going to mean is a huge concentration of wealth. Now, you can say that's a good thing and a reward for business practices, or a bad thing that leads to huge economic consequences. But let me tell you something about a concentration of wealth. Whenever there's a huge concentration of wealth, those people who have the wealth become more desperate to protect it. And those people who don't have it feel more and more left out. And those inequalities will lead to things like the development of fascism and the development of socialism. It's no coincidence. Inequalities lead to massive insecurities, and not just by those who don't have money, also insecurities by those who do, as they see it as, this is an all or nothing game, I got to keep what I have. So this is as a few years ago, the top 1% has 43% of the financial wealth. The total wealth is probably closer to 60% because it's not counting things like how to count. Land is so variable, it's hard to count. But one of the things that's actually kind of interesting about this, I just thought this was really interesting. Montana has the 30th highest level of income inequality. You can see New York is really high. And so Montana, and this is the legacy of really strong unions in this state. But look what's happening now, and it's only going to accelerate. Guess who has the fastest growing income inequality in the United States? Montana. And that's, you can see it in the political structure. Montana's changing really fast. It's no coincidence. If you want to know why, monopolies. All right, so let's get to 13. New philosophies of wealth. And the thing about this new philosophy is there's going to be such huge concentrations, and it's going to be so shockingly fast. These new robber barons, and they call them the nouveau rich. So there's going to be some kind of justification for this inequality. And it's not going to be, hey, a lot of them, it's not, we got to do something about this inequality. No, it's going to be, we got to justify us getting rich and basically our war on working people. And also, it's to control politics. They want, people don't come up with philosophies so they can sit in their ivory tower and ponder things. They want to come up with a philosophy to use as justification to continue policies that got them their wealth and power. Don't forget this. And people fall for this all the time, me included. I know you do. Somebody will say some philosophy they believe in. Some, they believe in some kind of economic system or political system or whatever it might be. And you think they really believe that. No, they're telling you they believe that. They might actually believe I'm using this so I can have a justification to keep doing what I'm doing. Remember cognitive dissonance and racism. So here is an anti-monopoly cartoon, and there's Jay Gould, Cyrus Fields. That's the guy, that's the other railroad I couldn't remember, and I was hoping it would pop into my head. Cornelius, Vanderbilt. And here they are with all their millions, and where do they build it on? Low wages for workers, propping it up. So with that, one is the gospel of success. And the gospel of success basically means, and kind of this glorification of the individual. We good? Everything's recording? We're all happy? Good. The glorification of the individual. The idea is that a person, through their own gumption and creativity and courage and luck, they became rich. Horatio Alger, it's a series of books, mostly written, ghostwritten by a number of different people. But they had all these rags to riches stories of it was almost some young boy who's in poverty or an orphan or has nothing. But through their courage and pluck and initiative, they became rich. And this would glorify the mythology of the self-made man, that someone could do it on their own. Now, you might say, this is not a bad thing. This will encourage people to work hard. Sure, perfectly fine. And if you work hard, you do have a shot. But this is a myth. Because first off, there are no real self-made men. They're all taking advantage of other things to help. For example, let me throw one out there right now. Montana, at least until now, has an incredibly good education system. You're taking advantage of that. You're not self-made. Your parents do that. Or I talked about the railroads. The railroads were able to do what they did because of massive amounts of government aid. The Union Pacific became huge and was able to do things like the Credit Mobilier. They get really rich, not because they were so smart, but because they had aid. And what the reason why this is important is this, people could say who are wealthy, I made it. I made it. Why can't you? More importantly, I made it. Why should I care about you? So this justifies doing nothing to change. Hey, everything's the same. We can all do it. And this leads to somebody else. At the same time this is all going on, there was this whole movement in science that would be personified by somebody by the name of Charles Darwin. I know you've heard of Darwin. This is actually going through about 100 years of scientific change. But the explosion would happen in people's consciousness in 1859 when Darwin would write On the Origin of Species. Now, those of you sitting at home might be wondering, how in the heck did we get to Darwin from Horatio Alger? Oh, they connect directly. But first off, since the Industrial Revolution, they have been finding things that have just blown people's vision away. And more than anything else, because it all started because of the massive array of canal building in England with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution at the end of the 18th century. They're building all these canals and they're finding fossils, lots of fossils. And their knowledge of the world had changed. Yeah, they found fossils, but they seem very, very isolated. Now they're just all over the place, all over England, and then we start building canals in France and the US. And also the same thing when they're mining more, significantly more mining of coal, of iron, of copper. They're finding all of these things. And the big thing, as more and more to European point of view and the United States, their point of view, they know more about the world than ever before. And they're realizing that there are species in here, there are animals, there are fossils of bones that the animals don't exist. And they're really old. And there are other indications that they're really old. One of the most famous were a couple different peat or mining in areas that had old peat marshes, like in southern France, and they were mining for coal. And every year, peat is kind of a layer of fungus and grass, kind of a fungusy grass layer, and it formed, and then kind of press down, that layer form over it. Kind of soft, gushy, kind of stinky stuff. And so there's a layer and then a layer on top of it. So you can count each year, layer. And a place near Orange, France, where in the mountains were this old peat farm, and then there were some geologic changes. And so it kind of shifted and became a perfect place for coal. And so they were mining there, and they could see all these layers. And they knew every layer was a year. And it was like, oh my gosh, there are millions of layers. The Earth is significantly older than they thought. They're more than that. I'm just giving you one example. The Earth is significantly older, and there are clearly different animal species all around the world, and animal species that have disappeared. It just blew people away. Well, Darwin was one of many scientists looking at this, and actually looking at something that Greeks had talked about, this concept of kind of this change in animals, a change in creatures. We sometimes dub evolution. But he was ready to write this massive story after 20 years of research when all of a sudden he found out that two other scientists might beat him to the punch. So he quick wrote on the origin of species, and he got out there first, and that's why everybody knows Charles Darwin. And the big thing he laid out was natural selection. And natural selection, we've all heard of this, is that there are certain traits, certain adaptations that different species have that allow them to adapt to a changing environment to survive. And those who have those adaptation, whatever the trait might be, these survive, and they pass those traits on to their descendants. Those who don't have this adaptation, they don't survive. That is natural selection. And let's be very clear about it. It doesn't mean that these animals are smarter or that these species are tougher or stronger. It's natural selection. I mean, if that were true, there'd be dinosaurs still roaming the plain, and we'd have to worry about the giant bears and saber-toothed tigers and the really big lions that used to roam the plains. They couldn't adapt to the changing environment and went away, yet mice survived. And as far as I know, a mouse probably could not beat a saber-toothed tiger in a fight. I know what you're thinking. I'd like to see it, but wouldn't happen. He avoided humans completely in this first work, but everybody immediately said, wait a second. If it's natural selection that led to different species, what about people? And I should add one more thing. This picture I show you of the family tree, it is, what it meant is that we have adaptations that survive and they branch off to different groups. It's not that animals are starting out as like slugs and by natural selection becoming humans. It just meant that all primates have a similar ancestral tree. So all these come from different branches. So from I know the Prometheans, but you can tell by their handprint. The old world monkeys, gorillas, new world monkeys, we all have similar ancestries. But chimpanzees are not by natural selection becoming human beings. We just have similar breeds. Chimpanzees, if there's any natural selections, are becoming different types of chimpanzees, etc. But in 1871, this is for the first time we would start using the term evolution, and he would coin and he would write The Descent of Man. And in it, there's Darwin. Now, this is the picture most people think of Darwin and The Descent of Man. He added humans, and this became much more controversial. And this, you know, it's the year 1871. So this is all the second industrial revolution. All these changes, all this consolidation, all these things happening at once. And this is where we start getting this belief of people who never really read Darwin, but heard about it, wanted to be scientific, and talked about a hierarchy of species. And that's where you get Darwin as a monkey, with this idea that people started saying, hey, humans must be evolving from monkeys. And it's this evolution. And here is one, the modern theory of the descent of man, and it's applying from these cells. All these cells are eventually evolving to a worm, all these different animals evolving and changing and eventually becoming man. This evolution of man. This is completely and totally not natural selection. Now you might be wondering, why is he telling us this? Partially, we've all seen this. Almost forgot something. But this implies that there's a hierarchy of species. This implies by natural selection, it has made the humans on top, and all these animals are becoming human. And this perversion of natural selection implies to many people, when they look at it, the human being must be on top and superior. Now, they thought that anyways, but now we have scientific proof. In fact, this is where a lot of people could square this with religion. But this is where we get to the same argument. If there can be a hierarchy of species, wouldn't natural selection mean a hierarchy of humans? And this is where you get this picture. We've all seen ones like this, or see cartoons like this, but they show from a chimp evolving to a man, which is not at all the way natural selection is done. But this is completely wrong. We've all seen it. This is not evolution. But is there a hierarchy in humans? Meaning, same argument. If humans are advanced and superior to tree slugs, can't wealthy people be superior than poor people? Which, remember, doesn't this sound like racism? Can whites be superior to people who are not white? And the subtle racism of this should be evident right in front of you. I chose this on purpose. Darker skin, lighter, now a Caucasian. That is the height of evolution. It's no coincidence that you're going to have a huge change in racial thinking. In fact, the term racism will come at this time. So that leads us to social Darwinism, taking the ideas of Charles Darwinism, perverting them into something totally different. Herbert Spencer was a gentleman, wealthy gentleman from England, and he looked at everything from a distance. He lived in a country manner. He did not have much connection with the actual Industrial Revolution itself. But he read Darwin, and he's like, I've figured everything out. Why do I have wealth? And I hear about these people in Manchester who live in such poverty. And what he said is this. First off, natural selection means letting people adapt to the environment. Therefore, everything should be laissez-faire. Government should step back and let people do what they will. Anytime people step in to try to alter the market, alter how people survive, will pervert it. Now, let's be clear about this. He's saying this as a wealthy man on an ivory tower who wants to keep his life going. If you have laissez-faire because of economies of scale, by definition, the big will dominate. And trust me, the big will dominate in a way that they're not going to say, hey, let's keep laissez-faire. No, they're going to say, let's keep me on top. And so when he looked at the origin of species, we'll let natural selection choose the winners and losers of society. And he is the one who came up with the phrase that every single one of you heard of, the survival of the fittest, implying it is the strongest and smartest who move ahead in natural selection. It's because the animals today were smarter and wiser, and therefore humans are the smartest of them all. That's why they're on top. And the wealthy are the smartest of them all. That's why they are on top. Survival of the fittest was not from Darwin. In fact, Darwin despised this because he knew it was not true. Nature does not support the strongest, or Tyrannosaurus rexes would be roaming the countryside. But this justifies his wealth, and he became the hit of the town. People started reading Spencer and was like, wow, this is great. And these new robber barons in America, going in the 1870s, read Spencer and like, we love Spencer. And so what he said was the different economic classes were natural. Someone has to be on top because they're the smartest. And the reason I put slavery in there is because doesn't this sound like the positive good theory of slavery? There's always somebody on top. Now you might be thinking, no, wait a second. We already know about slavery. How is this different? What does this matter? Why learn about this? This, because it has the quote, science behind it. It's sciencey. So people can say, this is science. This is Darwin. Do you want to argue against the greatest scientific achievement in world history? Now, of course, it's garbage science, but still science. And therefore, the reason there are poor is there's something wrong with them. And it comes down to the fact that they're poor because they're morally corrupt. They don't know how to work. They don't know how to save money. They're drunkards, and therefore it's their fault. And what a great advantage this is. So now the very wealthy can say, I don't have to care about them. It's their fault. And if I help them, I'm rewarding their corruption. And this gets to the big quote about this. And we see this to today. We see this in the way that people are punished for crimes. An Adam Smith quote that fits in with the arguments of social Darwinism. If you can't read it, you don't need to know. I mean, just read it. It's an old problem. We see frequently the vices and follies of the powerful much less despised than the poverty and weakness of the innocent. So this is going to justify all the practices of the robber barons who are forcing wages down, creating monopolies, not caring at all for people's retirement. Well, we don't care about that, but oh my goodness, you have to turn to crime or vice to survive. You really see this with women. Women are obviously, there's something wrong because starving women on the street have to resort to things like prostitution. This was a big issue in New York City in the 1890s. But the problem with Herbert Spencer was this. Herbert Spencer, although very well read, was very isolated. Some of the wealthiest people in the United States, including Vanderbilt and Carnegie and Jay Gould, paid for him to come to the United States in the 1870s. And they were looking at him like, he's like this conquering hero. Spencer is here. And so they brought Spencer there and to the United States. And he was literally met off the boat by Andrew Carnegie. And it was like, you're our patron saint. Now we don't have to feel guilty. And they took him to one of the poorest parts of New York called the Five Points. And they brought Spencer around there. And Spencer could not believe the way the mostly immigrant poor lived in absolute misery and despair. And they were showing Spencer like, see, you were right. Look how morally corrupt these people are. And Spencer's like, no, wait, I didn't mean you should allow human beings to live like this. And of course, you know exactly what happened. The men like Carnegie and Vanderbilt, like, you're right, and we have to, we still want to make money, but we have to change. Well, no, of course not. They sent Herbert Spencer on his way. We want somebody to justify what we're doing. And so they found William Graham Sumner. William Graham Sumner will write a book called Folkways, and I can't begin to describe what a big deal this was. Okay, Folkways is in 1906, but he was already writing before this. Folkways will put it all together. He took what Spencer said and brought social Darwinism to a new level. What he said is all individuals, this natural selection, is in the market. We're all in the market for goods. And you might think, wait a minute, how are you in the market? Well, if you get a job, you're in the labor market. You're in the market to buy and sell or to buy products in the store. So you're competing with other people to buy products. All these things are in the market. It's all struggle. There are winners and losers. And therefore, government intervention is futile. It's futile. Why would you ever help anybody? Because then you are destroying the natural way. It is natural to have struggle. It's natural for some people to be on top, and therefore government intervention is futile unless to help the nation out, government aid should be sent to those who are meant to succeed. You give money, wealth, power to the very wealthy. They're the ones who know how to build factories. They're the ones who know how to marshal wealth, and the country will prosper. And a rising tide will raise all ships. Sumner said exactly what they wanted to hear. This was music to their ears. They loved Sumner. They feted and dined him and praised him. And he would become the basics, elements of what's going to be called conservative economics. Now, we'll get to liberal economics, we'll get to conservative economics. It's not quite there yet. And by the way, if you like this or dislike this and think that I'm a liberal and I believe this, or I'm a conservative, I believe this. Well, first off, most people misuse those terms now. And secondly, get out of your I'm on a team mentality. So with that, what does he want? Laissez-faire. But you might think, wait a minute, laissez-faire is hands off. Remember what I told you. This justifies aid for big, don't mess with competition. And so, last thing. Oh, and here, this is a complete social Darwinistic cartoon. Here's labor. And look at the nice life labor leads. And so put yourself in his place. Look at all the work that those who own the capital have to do. Give them a break, workers. Just give them a break. They're working so hard for you, which of course, no, it doesn't work that way. That's a fantasy. And so thus we're coming to the last thing. It's called the gospel of wealth. The gospel of wealth would be Andrew Carnegie's way of looking at this. Carnegie wanted social Darwinism. He wanted money, but he didn't want the guilt. Carnegie was desperate to go to heaven. And he really pushed this idea that he really did. Unlike most people who become rich, who become super rich, he didn't start out with a lot of wealth. I mean, most people today who become rich are already very wealthy. Upper middle class or wealthy. Same with them. Same as them. He actually had nothing. He did have hard work, luck, government contracts in the Civil War, avoided the draft. But he wanted to go to heaven. It was very important to him. But he wanted to keep doing things that questionable morality, especially the way they treated workers. And so the first big element of this is, all right, let's take natural selection and the social Darwinism and say social Darwinism is proven correct because wealth is God's blessing. I must be a good person because I'm wealthy. There's tie-ins with Calvinism here. He is Scottish, so it's Presbyterian, but wealth is good. It's God's blessing. And therefore, I can get money in any way possible, but then it is my duty to give it away. Charity. And when he sold his oil company, his steel company, yeah, and become the first billionaire, which is, he had so much wealth, it's hard to even comprehend today. You can't make direct comparisons in money, even if you count inflation. It's really hard to do. He would give hundreds of millions of dollars everywhere, hundreds of millions of dollars away every year. The Carnegie Foundation still gives money away. In fact, one of the things he would do is build libraries all over the country. In fact, the little town I grew up in, not little town, in Montana, it's one of the bigger towns, Miles City. When I was a kid, it was over 10,000. Now it's about 8,000. But the library used to be the Carnegie Library. The Carnegie Endowment started this library. So he gave it away, and he certainly did not have to do this. He gave more away than a lot of the very wealthy who would do fake giving away. Like today, they all make foundations, which is kind of a scam. But no direct aid for the poor. As he called them, the slothful. They're lazy, they're drunken, they're not worthy. If you give money to poor people, when he meant poor people, he meant the vast majority of people. He meant all of us. Don't just waste it because of think about social Darwinism. They're poor because they're morally corrupt and we'll reward them. So he didn't want to do things like give them better wages and better living conditions, shorter hours, help for their family. No, I'll build them an opera house. When he destroyed the labor union at Homestead Steel, when he destroyed it, it's called a strike, but really it was just a destruction of the union so he could cut their pay by a third. And they're already paid almost nothing. Unions did get higher wages, but not that much higher. When he destroyed them, he did feel guilty. So he built them an opera house. So Pittsburgh has one of the nicest opera houses in the entire country. See, I'm helping the poor. So when you're done with your 12-hour shift at the steel mill, 6 days a week, you can go to an opera. That was his attitude. So you can see I have a little bit of cynicism for it. So here's obviously a pro one, free university education. And a little more complex than that. And thus we'll finish with a dog smoking a pipe. All right, so on that happy note, short answer questions, a few things about labor unions tomorrow. I didn't quite get to it, and we'll go from there. I'll try to grade those short answer questions as soon as possible. I talked about the bits on the test. The quiz will not be that hard. Right. Let me rephrase that. The quiz is going to be from notes. Oh, I was going to put a different picture in. I'm still in the Custer battlefield. No questions? All right. I will make this due tomorrow. Have a good day. Goodbye.